quite frankly, it's kind of unusual.
It's quite Franklin.
Quite, got it. Quite Franklin.
I really want us to get into the whole idea of flexibility and mobility. And I know we were talking about that a while ago. And Doc, chiropractor that's been working on me, he helped you your whole career, and I'm very thankful for you for bridging that gap. And like I said, my heart goes out to Doc because I'm eternally grateful for the care that he shows me on a regular basis.
He's awesome.
He is awesome. And so he's been working on dry needling and all of that. Because
but what is he doing all this? Okay, hold on. Give some background information because so I introduced Cody to my friend Doc Utzler, who had taken care of me during my career while you were actually walking. When you had started in New York, and by the time you got to Cincinnati, I introduced you to him because the body was already pretty trashed.
It was.
So explain what was going on exactly.
Yeah, my hips were rotated down and separated. So I was limping my way through the mountains because I am missing my bone in my right leg.
Yeah.
And so long story short, he's like, not only should I not be able to do this whole venture that we completed, but his whole mantra has been I shouldn't have done it.
Yeah.
Right. And but one of the treatments that he's working on with me is, I guess not treatments, but is working on, he's like, stretch more. Let's start working on flexibility.
Yeah, okay.
And that's the term that, that you and I were discussing and what he's been wanting me to work on. And through some of my research, gathering some information, I kind of found this, this article and pieced together this definition. I wanted your input on it.
Okay.
Would you say that this is accurate or not? Basically, flexibility deals with soft tissues, so your muscles, ligaments, tendons, to passively stretch. But mobility, on the other hand, focuses a lot more on the joints, which is where the two bones meet, so your ankles, knees, shoulders, things of that nature. And that is the ability to actively move through the joint's full range of motion.
Okay. I don't know what it means to passively stretch in something, because I feel like, for example, if I'm sitting on the ground with straight legs and I try to put my nose to my knees, that I feel like I'm pretty actively trying to do that. I'm not really sure.
Nobody do that for fun.
Yeah. Let me back off of those definitions for a second and just define mobility. For me, mobility is your ability to move into any kind of position, whatever that position may be, freely without having to force yourself. Whereas flexibility is your ability to move into that position where you may be forcing yourself. So, for example, if I'm sitting on the ground, and in the example I previously gave, and I want to put my nose to my knees, and I can just bend down and do that without forcing myself, I have the mobility to get down there. Now, that mobility requires the flexibility to get there, right? Like, they're kind of, the two are interconnected.
Yeah.
Because if my flexibility lacks, then as I go to lean forward, I'm only going to be able to get so far forward. I'm not going to be able to get all the way down. So as my flexibility increases, like the more I work on my flexibility, the more flexibility I have, the more mobile I become. So if I can only bend forward a few degrees initially because I lack flexibility, as my flexibility increases, I'll be able to bend further until I can get to the point where, if I continue to work this on a frequent basis, daily, whatever, that I can get to the point where I can put, this is my knees to my nose. I don't know if that's very clear. I don't know if that's clear to everybody out there. But that's what I'm doing. So, but anyway, that's the way. I actually read a definition on mobility one time that was, mobility is having strength in flexibility. Okay, so I'm going to get back to your definition in a second here. I might have you read it a second time to me. So I was taking a yoga class in Bali one time, and I remember this guy was sitting, I think it's inappropriate to call it Indian style anymore. I don't think that's an appropriate term. I think it's just cross-legged now. Either way.
Butterfly.
Yeah. No, it's like, it wasn't I don't think it was a full lotus position, but he was just sitting with his legs crossed. Yeah. And it was a mobility class that I was taking. And he just looked at the class. He's like, all right, let's get started. And from that position, he just stands up, like kind of like on his ankles. He just stood up, and I looked at him. I was like, what? Like, I literally am going to have to like straighten my legs out, put my hand back on the floor, get myself up. Like, it's going to be like a 3 or 4 point motion.
Call a forklift in real quick.
Yeah, right. To get myself up. Like, don't trust me. I did a proper jujitsu stand up, albeit, but nonetheless, I just watched him do that, and I thought, man, I do not have the flexibility to do that, which really was mobility at that time. And in this class, we took these yoga blocks and we were like moving them around and make it like without like tipping things over, without dropping the block, and your ability to like move through your shoulders. And this is obviously something that I work because prior to training. So for me, I work on this mobility prior to training, like before my warm-ups. I'll get to that in a second. So anyway, we do this mobility class. And I'm like, wow, like I really need to work on this more because that portion of my fitness has dropped off as I've gotten older, right? I mean, this is the difference between training 25 hours a week, and we've talked about this previously, like putting 9 or 10 hours a week in, because I get into the gym, I get my lifts, and then it's like, okay, well, I got other things to do in the day now too. So I can't spend another 15 minutes before I get in doing all my mobility and 15 to 20 minutes after I'm done working on my flexibility, and then an hour and a half of lifting on top of it. Like your day really, really begins to drag on. But when we're talking about, strength and motion with mobility, it's flexibility with strength is the definition that I said that I really liked for mobility. Yeah. Is that yoga with me is just, it's fun. It's fun being that guy in the yoga class that sweats a bunch and the women start to move away from you. And I've accidentally kicked people in yoga before, not as part of like yoga MMA kind of cross train. It was just pure accident. But we were in this downward dog position, and we kick our leg back and we bring our knee to our nose, try to touch your knee to your nose. And if I work on this for several days, I can actually get my knee to my nose and I can hold it there for a couple seconds. But I mean, I'm really straining to keep my knee to my nose. It's tough on me, because I lack that, well, I'll call it mobility or that strength in the flexibility. So I just distinctly remember I was doing yoga next to this lady. She must have been 70 years old. And she just touches her knee to her nose like it's no big deal. And she probably could have stayed there for a half hour if need be, right? Like I'm struggling to get there, in that position. And she just kind of looks over at me like, are you doing okay over there, fella? You seem to be like grunting really hard.
Don't get rich grunting now.
So this is where it was at this moment where I really redefined strength. Like, what does it mean to be strong?
Right.
Because if you and I are going to get in a bench press contest or a squat contest or a deadlift contest, like if we're just going to go in the gym and pick up some heavy stuff, well, this 70-year-old lady that's making me look dumb, well, I'm going to outbench her. I'm going to out deadlift, all that kind of stuff. But if we're defining strength as your ability to get into this motion and hold it and see who could stay the longest, like I probably could have kept my knee to my nose for 3 to 5 seconds and then I'm out.
Yeah.
She literally probably could have stayed there for a good 10 minutes, if not longer, because it just required zero effort for her to be there.
Yeah.
And so
you're saying that's strength.
That is a form of strength.
Yeah.
And so she has the flexibility to put her knee to her nose. I have the flexibility to put my knee to my nose, but she has what you would be called by that definition mobility to do it because she can hold it there. She has strength in that motion, whereas I don't. Like I'm forcing myself to get there,
right? And
I'm barely able to hold it.
So do you think that it should be in our society maybe a more valued form of strength? Like, should that be something that's more?
I'm not going to make this a societal kind of thing. I mean, to each their own, right?
Well, I mean, I don't mean society, I guess, but I mean like a.
No, I think it's a crucial part of fitness.
Yeah, because that's what I meant. Yeah.
Your question sounded a little funny, and I might be making a joke here, but it is a very crucial part of fitness because so rewinding to my actual career when I'm competing, like so we would typically start the day off with warming up. Now that warming up would be some sort of dynamic movement motions, right? Much like the yoga class I was talking about where this guy stood up out of his cross leg stance where he just stands up. So these motions, keep in mind, I'm doing, we're grappling. My hips have to be able to open up wide and move, and my back has to be able to twist and spin for different types of submission movements. And you do these kinds of things. Even if you're just drilling in jiu-jitsu and drilling these movements, technically you're kind of working your mobility as you're doing that. Like, and so we can do these dynamic warm-ups and these mobility exercises. And if you're taking shots, like, that's exactly what it is. You want to force your body into positions that it's not comfortable with.
Sure.
That I'm sitting on this chair. I'm going to get up. I'm going to walk. Like my legs don't need to bend much more than the height of this chair for me to stand up and
Right.
for me to go about my daily life
Right.
for the average person. So when I go into the gym, for example, and I want to squat and go butt to ankles on my squat just to get that extra range of motion, now I'm forcing my body into a position. And this is exactly what we end up losing as we age. When you think about a baby, like when a baby comes out of the womb,
They're bendy.
oh man, right? I mean, they basically they were in this big tight
Right.
ball.
Completely.
And so, like for example, babies don't have fully developed kneecaps, so their joints have a much different flexibility. But even still, when you watch like young kids, because they still are used to bending in those motions, and they have this tremendous amount of mobility and flexibility, they can. I remember being a young kid, and I would walk on my ankles, or I would curl my toes and walk on my toe knuckles,
Yeah.
and do that stuff when I was like, I don't know, 8 years old.
Mm-hmm.
I can't do that now. I mean, first of all, my toes don't have the flexibility for it, or the pain tolerance for that matter. But I don't even think my ankles have the flexibility to bend the foot down that much. Because every single joint has to have that kind of mobility and flexibility. So you tend to lose that as you get older. And so at what level is that an acceptable level for a person? Well, I mean, if you're big into fitness, and depending on what kind of fitness you're into, well, if your fitness is yoga, then obviously you need to maintain a very decent level of mobility and flexibility. If your fitness is jiu-jitsu, I would argue the same thing. Not the same movements, obviously, as yoga, but oftentimes very similar in their own ways.
Sure.
But even as like an Olympic lifter, for example, if you're going to do like a snatch and clean, like going straight above your head, you have to have that mobility in your shoulders to get back there. And if you lack that mobility, or you quit working on your flexibility and things of that nature, then you're not going to have strength in that motion. So I would say that I'm not as strong as an Olympic lifter. Well, number one, because I'm just not that strong at that motion. Like I can't pick that kind of weight up. But secondly, like I don't have that same kind of flexibility to put my shoulders, if I'm going to do that motion, like that overhead snatch, I don't have the ability to put my shoulders back in that position, particularly under a heavy load.
Right. Well, what's crazy is ever since I was young, so my dad was big into fitness and stuff like that. And ever since I was young, he always talked about how yoga and ballet were some of the things that like some of your most successful, prolific level anything did. Right. Because a lot of them did that. I guess, as you're talking about the strength that requires the body to move in that manner for different things. Right. And there's maybe not the best way to train it if all you're doing is lifting. Right. Like you can't actively train half of that stuff.
Well, listen, you bring up a good point with ballet. Like take a ballerina, for example. A ballerina can go up on the tip of their toe and they can stand there.
Right.
Now I can't. I don't have that flexibility in my ankle, but just for example, if I went up as high on the ball of my foot as I possibly could, how long could I hold that position? I don't have the strength to hold that position.
Danielson.
Yeah. But I don't have the strength. I don't have the strength to hold it, right?
Yeah, right.
I can throw a kick and come up onto the ball of my foot momentarily, which is what I've trained myself to do.
Yeah.
Because that's all the strength that I've needed is this momentary up and back down with my leg. Whereas a ballerina, she would be able to stand on the ball of her feet, lift her leg to her head, hold it there for 5 or 10 seconds, however long she wanted to, until I was like, okay, you can go ahead and put that down now.
That brings me to something that's like, well, how do we better both of them, right? And part of me, I know like, I think this helps more flexibility because the muscles are, I guess at rest or elongated. I don't know.
Yeah.
But like foam rollering and things like that, I heard was good.
Yeah.
And I did a lot of that, and I had a mobility routine as well. I do actually every morning. But how do we, what are some ways that that are like really beneficial for that stuff?
Okay, so one of the things I'll typically do in the mornings is, when I take the time, and listen, I say this, like, I don't want people to think like I'm regimented about this. I could be a lot better about this than the way that it's going to sound, but
I should be.
Get up in the morning sometimes, and I'll do a series of like upward dog, downward dog, like just that basic yoga stretching to a cobra pose, And
So you like yoga as your means?
well, that's one way.
Yeah.
Another way, I have grappling mats in my house.
Mm.
So sometimes I'll come downstairs and just like shadow wrestle, nothing
Yeah.
hard, but just, forcing myself, taking shots, penetration shots, shooting, rolling to my back,
Sure.
twisting around,
Yeah.
getting myself into different jiu-jitsu positions and keeping my body moving that direction as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah.
And that keeps the mobility, but that's going to train me for the mobility that I need, right?
Yeah.
Obviously, going back to my Olympic lifting example, I'm still not going to have the mobility in the shoulders for that particular movement unless unless I'm specifically working
Sure.
the flexibility in the shoulders. So go back to your original definition that you read at
Yeah.
the top of the hour of
It's
this.
flexibility is the ability of the soft tissues, so muscle, ligaments, tendons, to passively stretch. Mobility is the joint. It focuses on the joints. And the ability of those to actively move through the full range.
Okay, so keep in mind that when you get to the joints, you have like tendons and ligaments, but the muscles also tie into these joints as
Right.
well. So these muscles and everything, you still have to have the flexibility required for that mobility. So I still think that there's
Yeah.
obviously these joints, they're involved. So I mean, yeah, I agree with that definition, but I maybe
Kind of don't.
disagree a little bit.
Yeah.
But either way, I mean, having a mobility routine in the morning. So when I train, I'll typically start off with some dynamic movements, get that mobility.
Sure, different than the passive hold it
Well,
stretching
but I'm not even
pause,
talking
right?
about dynamic stretching because I
Oh,
won't even,
okay.
almost never stretch before I work out. For example, actually, I was in the gym today and I was working kicks and I'm throwing kicks. If I want to throw head kicks, I'm not coming out of the gate throwing a head kick. I'm going to throw half a dozen leg kicks, half a dozen kicks to the body on the bag before I start bringing my leg up top, just to get that hip moving.
Yeah.
And that's just a dynamic movement that's
Right.
working my mobility. And obviously I have the flexibility in my hip to get my leg up that high.
Right.
And so, it's about maintaining that. So in order for me to keep that way, then when I'm done working out, I'll go in and I will stretch the hip flexibility.
And that's where the pause and hold comes in.
Exactly.
Yes,
And-
sir.
But then now we're getting into a whole different subject of dynamic flexibility versus like dynamic stretching and static stretching.
Sounds like a great topic for another time.
Yeah, well, we'll have to talk about that. But either way, mobility before your workouts, you work out, then stretching, working on your flexibility after your workouts.
Beautiful.
Quite Franklin is providing this podcast as a public service, but it is neither a legal interpretation nor legal advice, nor a statement of Quite Franklin policy. Reference to any specific product or entity does not constitute an endorsement or recommendation of that product or entity by Rich Franklin or Quite Franklin. The views expressed by guests on the podcast are their own, and their appearance on the program does not imply an endorsement of them or any entity they represent. Views and opinions expressed by Quite Franklin employees or representatives are the views and opinions of the persons expressing them, and do not necessarily reflect the views or opinions of Quite Franklin or any of its officials or principals. Nothing heard on this podcast at any time is medical advice or is intended as medical advice. The listener must always consult his or her personal physician or other qualified medical professional regarding any questions of a medical nature. If you have any questions about this disclaimer, please contact our general counsel.